everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. Happy Saturday. So I want to talk about a clutch option for the XL-101, 102, 103, 104, 113, 114, 122, 123, VI 123. I think that's all of them. At least that were sold here in the US. And the 122 technically wasn't. That was an overseas version, but it doesn't matter. So there were a lot of versions of clutches. Before I totally dive into that, obviously I wasn't around, but from what I have read, the introduction of those saws, I think the XL-101 was almost like their Ford Pinto. Okay? Decent idea, but with enough flaws that it just forever, it wasn't going to work here in the US. And that's why it ended up being XL-76 and the XL-130. You know, those were sold overseas, primarily, well, internationally, I should say. Primarily, I think they were sold up to the north in Canada. I know some of them managed to migrate technically overseas, but so the 101, God, I think there were 3 clutch revisions. You know, they started off with an aluminum clutch carrier that didn't prove to work out so well, a smaller diameter clutch that increased in diameter a little bit. We had the epoxied fuel tank and oil tank issue. More so the oil tank was a bigger issue. So being part of the throttle handle, that oil tank, with just being epoxied together, if your bar pinched in the cut and you reefed on it too hard, you'd actually pop that seal. And for a while they didn't have a fix. Then they released an oil tank fix that was a new cover and a couple of screws with rubber grommets on them, and you were basically sandwiching it together. Then, of course, there was a new throttle handle, but I don't know if you could find that in the blue. So your saw was always going to be kind of a cobbled together mess. So, you know, they changed, like I say, the clutches. The body parts had some improvements that needed to be made. I don't think, there was the skirt thickness. The original ones were a 1 15/16 thin skirt, and I personally have never seen this, but from what I've read, there were instances of skirt breakage. Now, some of that, a lot of it in reality, was probably being, you know, misaligned on assembly. I don't know. Like I say, I wasn't there. I haven't seen that. Personally, as I've worked on them, I've worked on both, thin and thick skirt, but they upsized that so that it was a thicker skirt, up to a 2-inch, so they had to remachine the crankcases. So there was just one thing after another. When you look through the service memos from that time period, I know I sound like a broken record, but it was literally one thing after another that they were updating. And sure, you make changes to any model, but I think that, again, this is my opinion based on what I've seen, that's why the Super XL and XL-12 lived into the 90s, and these things were all but disappeared by the early 70s in the United States. So, anyway, blah 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 history lesson. We were going to talk about clutches. Okay. So I wrote down some part numbers. And this is out of the last revision XL-123 IPL that I'm aware of. It's the latest one. And the components of that clutch, which had been at that point upsized to a full 3 inches, and it looks eerily like another Homelite clutch of this design that's 3 1/16. Yeah. So your clutch your clutch backplate is a 64904-1. Your clutch spring is a 65842, and your clutch shoe is a 64569-3. Now in reality, any 64569 shoe is going to work. The Dash 3 would have just been the most modern compound in the shoe that was supposed to wear the best. But what does that clutch look like? That right there. And now you see why I said it looks like a clutch from another model. And it's real easy if you're looking on eBay to confuse these damn things. I mean, that is almost a dead ringer for a Super XL automatic style clutch, which I'm digging for one that's not totally roached. And I'm digging pretty deep here. Got a number of these that need to have their shoes replaced. But that's for another time and place. There's some key ways you can identify the difference. Right there. There we go. See this one, just a smidge bigger. Literally. We'll measure this. We'll get out the micrometer. Even though a tape measure would do, a tape measure doesn't have a digital readout. Okay. Get on the back plate here. Okay. 2.9, what is that? 6'7". 3 inches. Get on the back plate of the Super XL 3.064. Now on eBay, if you're looking at clutches, you're never going to be able to tell the difference. Unless you're Superman. And I guess then more power to you. But how can you tell? Bore size is the first one. Okay, you can see this is one size bigger. I don't know the actual thread size. I don't. I know it's a reverse thread. That didn't help. But again, you can see the bore size a little bit different. If you're lucky, and you can see it on eBay, the threads only go halfway in on the Super XL clutch in order to step it properly. They're only halfway in. On this style clutch, they go all the way through. You can't rely on spring color. You can't rely on shoe shape. And honestly, you can't even rely on the shape of the back plates here. Sorry, I realized that was out of frame again. You can't rely on the shape of the back plates because they look exactly the same. So that's how you can identify it. If you're not holding them both in your hands, look for the threading and look for the size of the thread. You work on these enough, you kind of start to see it. Alright, so why am I jabbering about this clutch? Well, because Homelite had these clutches available as an assembly, yet none of these damn IPLs showed it. Buried in a service memo somewhere is a part number, but I can tell you, the more I've done this, the more I realize shops didn't pay as much attention to service memos as Homelite wanted them to. Excuse me, as Homelite wanted them to. I'll leave it at that. So what's a guy to do? You go to your IPL and you see all these clutch parts. There's no part number for the damn assembly. And you're like, I don't want to mess with that. What do? You look for, either on my website or on eBay, they are plentiful in both locations. An A-69459. And I don't care if it has a dash A, B, or C. It does not matter. The only thing that'll change is the color of the springs and maybe the shoes. They're all going to wear beautifully. This is a solid, good clutch. This is better than an S clutch. This is better than an aluminum carrier clutch. This is a heavy-duty clutch. You know, I would take this style in Super XL over the modern 3-shoe line clutch any day of the week. Any day of the week. If you don't abuse this style, it'll last you just damn near forever. Because you can run them forever. And the only way they're really going to wear is if you're running too long of a bar, or you're one of those guys that digs your dogs in and is slipping it and just really smoking it all the time. Then they'll wear out. Short of that, it's pretty hard to do. So an A-69459. But then you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, I got my XL-101. It's got a tune 5/8 drum on it or some other oddball size right now. That's going to be a real pain in the neck to match all this up. Not so much. Number one, if you don't want to listen to an idiot like me drone on video, go to the XL-123 IPL. It details it all in there, exactly what you need. Race, bearing, and which drums run which race and bearing. Okay? This is all in that IPL. It just doesn't show this assembly. The 3 parts that I read off earlier are this assembly. So, options. If you've got a saw, you're trying to match some stuff up, here's what you need that will fit this. You can go with a A-64908 Spur sprocket. You can go with an A-65988 rim style sprocket. I highly recommend that. Also somewhat easy to find. Or an Oregon 68210, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is this, without the Homelite printing on it and Oregon printing. Those 3 options use a 63990 race and a 64333 bearing. Very simple. All 3 use that. And just to prove that a 65988, hopefully that focused. Check that out. I didn't write down the thrust washers. Odds are good. What you've got will probably work. Maybe not when you go to the outer one. You might have to upsize that. But it's all in that XL-123 IPL. Right here. You have another option. There's another Spur sprocket that'll fit. And I think this one would have been used on a 350. And maybe... God, I'm failing to remember now. I almost want to say that a version of this was used on some Super EZ models. I'm pretty sure it was. But that A68465 Spur sprocket, you got to use a different bearing. And you guys might recognize this. A 64124 cage bearing and a 65985 race. Now those 2 parts will sound really familiar to those of you who watched my video from, God, I think it's been almost 3 years ago, and that scares the hell out of me. The time's flying that fast. The video I did on what do I do with my XL-76, my Super XL-123, those models, because the sprocket that's specified in the IPLs for those is unobtainium. It does not exist. It might on a shelf somewhere, but there are not very many of them out there. Certainly not in the United States. I may have come across one. And that's why I started dinking around figuring out what combination of OEM parts would work. That should sound familiar. Those bearing, that race is what you can use to work a different sprocket onto those saws. But I don't want to confuse the issue. We're just talking about these American saws, XL-101 to XL-123. So those are your options. and they're good options. As far as I know, both the 64333 bearing and the 63990 race, I think those are very easy to find. I know I have some in stock. I'm certain that eBay, Jeff on eBay, I'm certain that he's got them in stock, and I'm sure a handful of other folks do too. So that would be my recommendation. If you're fighting clutch issues on any one of those models, I would standardize to something that gives you maximum durability and flexibility. And for me, the maximum durability is this style clutch, because you can still buy these individual parts. Those clutch shoes are so inexpensive and so easy to come by. Okay? Even if you manage to wear a set out, you could throw a set on the shelf probably for under, hell, probably $10, but definitely under $20. You could have a set of shoes and springs on your shelf waiting for you. And if you run the rim style sprocket and you don't hog it, you don't do the things like I talked about where you smoke one, then all you're doing is replacing a rim every once in a while. This is a 7-spline standard. And while those damn things have gone up in price, just like every other thing on the planet, still, for under $10, you can get a rim, slip it on there. My guess is that for any one of us, even if we're primarily cutting firewood with one of these saws, it would last the life of us and the saw. So, just wanted to throw that out there. I will put these part numbers in the description, and maybe a link. Yeah, I'll put a link to the IPL that I referenced for this, that I think you guys should reference. And again, this stuff's easy to find, and it's very possible on any given day of the week that you can find this cheaper on eBay than you can find it in my store. But I don't bounce my pricing around that much. eBay stuff comes and goes. I'm consistent, so whatever that is or isn't worth. So I hope this takes a little mystery out of the options for those saws. Even though, again, they weren't the most popular thing here in the U.S., for all of us collectors, we want them. And they are good saws. Once you get past the quirks, if you got a good running XL-123, or one you could make a good runner, it'd be just as reliable as a Super XL. By the time they got to that saw, they had all the kinks worked out. But it was too late. So, anyway, hope that helped you guys out. We'll catch you on the next one.